sneaked in here, about 20 seconds. Will there be a link to the recording sent via email? So we already got a question, and we usually do send out the recordings. It'll be on our YouTube and put up there. Just if you don't get the email, please just check our YouTube out in a couple days and you should see it. Okay, so it's the top of the hour, 1 o'clock Central Time for me. Jonathan, you're at what is it, 2 or 3 for you? 3?
It's 2 p.m. I'm actually
2
successfully
p.m.
hitting my siesta hour right now. So all of you are going to help me stay awake after the heavy lunch that I ate.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do some. So, everyone, if you don't know already, welcome. I'm David Perry, and this is Jonathan Click. He's our solutions engineer at our new company, Qodo. So, it's not a new company, it's just a name change. I just like to say that. And we might want to even chat about that a little bit. But some housekeeping here, the Q&A, we will, try to answer all your questions. If we cannot answer them live or through the chat, we will try to address all of them as possible. And there is an internal chat that you can talk to us on, but that's just between us and the panelists. So no one else in the public will see that. So use that more like, hey, I can't hear you, or, there's something hanging out of your mouth. What, why you eat, that kind of stuff. To help us out. So thank you so much. So without further ado, have at it, Jonathan.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Jonathan, as David indicated. I'll be kind of walking through a lot of the demo today. David, as a developer advocate, he'll be my partner in crime, and we'll get through this together. One of the things I first might want to highlight, if any of you are kind of having a confused moment going, am I in the right webinar? We did change our name recently. In fact, if I flip over here and just open up a new tab, find that not only yesterday did we announce that we have a new name. Part of this, by the way, is just simply put, like, we've evolved quickly over the past couple of years as a company, and our focus on quality code, hence Qodo. A name change was kind of appropriate for this kind of juncture in our company to kind of continue the vision of what we're doing. And then also with that, we also announced yesterday $40 million of additional funding through a Series A, which I don't know if how many of you are familiar, but 40 million for a Series A is pretty huge. And we're really excited about how this is going to be able to grow our vision with building quality code. And today, as we demo the products that we have, you'll get to see kind of where our mind is at and how we're thinking about things and so forth. And we hope that it can be a benefit to you.
And I get to get on my soapbox now even more to say quality, quality, quality. So if anyone's ever worked with me, probably not, that's on the webinar, but that's my big deal, is we need to keep on producing and striving to produce integrity and quality in our code. And I'm just elated that we're super focused on that.
Awesome. Awesome. And Dave, just for context, David, you were from another previous customer of ours before you joined the company too. So, and that's kind of where you first got acquainted with what's now called Qodo.
Yep. And that's what sold me, because when I first came on, it was when the company was like almost brand new, and all they had was the testing panel, which I adored. And that's what it's about, because you're still in the driver's seat and you still can write the code. Now we have the chat panel and other things you're going to show that'll help you write the code, but you still need to understand it, and you still need to ensure the quality and the handover. So it just improves your quality and also the generation. So that's what I like about it, because I'm lazy when it comes down to it. So
the other thing I might note here, you've got this URL here, the Get Started link. If you go there, you'll be able to download our product, particularly the IDE extension, which will be a huge part of the demo today. And so if you wanted to follow along, kind of do the things that I'm doing and whatnot, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, kind of getting into it, when we think about quality, what we're really doing here is we're focused on one of the first areas that David mentioned that we started doing was we really focused around this idea of testing, right? Testing is one of those things that, frankly, as software developers really don't enjoy doing. It's not like we're solving problems per se in a lot of cases, or building things or creating things. It's not as fulfilling or exciting. And so the way we're kind of looking at the world right now, all of you have probably seen or played with AI dev tools to some extent. I'm not going to name any of them. We already know the names and stuff that are out there. But the heavy focus is really around writing code and writing code faster. And frankly, that's a good thing. I've used some of those tools even before joining Codium. Or not. Oh my goodness, I said Codium. We're gonna have to say Qodo.
Ding,
By the
that's
way,
one. I'm keeping
that's
score.
one, right? We should have a contest, everybody. Every time I say the incorrect company name or incorrect product name, because it was product renames, you need to count it, and whoever gets the most accurate answer gets a prize of some sort. I don't know what that is. It's probably just like my heartfelt thanks. But in any case, when we're thinking about this, writing code is really just part of this. And there's a lot more that goes into having quality code, not to mention that, frankly, when we think about productivity, writing code, depending on if you're like a junior engineer or senior engineer, I mean, some senior engineers, they're only like actually coding maybe 20% of their time, maybe less, maybe a little bit more, depends. Junior engineers might be coding more. And the reality is we want to encompass and add productivity to a much larger, diverse amount of the software development lifecycle. In fact, you might even notice reviewing PRs is listed here. And so when we move into the next slide here and talk about the products that we're going to be talking about today, which is Qodo Gen, which is our IDE extension, and then Qodo Merge, which is our application for Git repos like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and so forth, we're going to talk about how we really want to really kind of provide more of a closer to an end-to-end experience of helping developers with quality code. And this is the first part of our journey. There's another product we have right now we're not going to talk about today. You can go to our GitHub repo. It's open source and also helps with code coverage and things like that. And we're just continuing to move in this direction of building an entire platform. And that's where a lot of that funding that I talked about earlier can really help out with. Now, for the purposes of the demo today, we're going to be going through plus one to the name change. No more confusion, he says. There was another company that's closely related to the name Codium, and there was a lot of confusion between the two. So in any case, the other company who shall not be named. So in any case, talking about the demo today, we're going to talk about different phases that we help out with from a Qodo Gen perspective. And then we're going to talk about how we help out from a Qodo Merge perspective and go through this kind of flow of where as a developer, I need to do some research. I need to learn the code I'm working with. I need to understand different things. I need to basically plan a little bit before I actually get into building, and then how we can help with building, polishing code, and then ultimately reviewing that code. And so that's going to be the flow today. David, just to kind of like act as a spoiler a little bit for the demo, like, is there any parts of this or part of this that as a developer, this is most exciting to you? Something that we should be
Well,
most looking forward to based through the eyes of David Perry?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, last night I answered one of our fellow sales engineers. I won't name. So they go out there, had a question about how our PR, our golden repos. So in our paid product, we have the ability that we can index and do RAG on our golden repos. And what was that schedule of doing that? And what did it look like? And I was able to actually search the current code base of that implementation that does that in our code base, and I was able to answer that. So that goes right to your point. I wasn't writing code, but you have to understand the code to even be able to add to it or enhance it without introducing bugs. And I was able to quickly and easily find where the code was. Python code, and I'm not even a Python developer all the time. I love Python, but I don't use it as a big, large application, and was able to, get in there and see, hey, here's where we do it, the time schedule, and when does it get indexed, and also that it looks at the Git hash. So it doesn't re-index the file if it's still the same hash. So little things like that to be able to get very intricate. And I've never touched that code before. So I love it.
So let's make sure to do that. In fact, that's going to be one of the early things when we talk about research. We're going to talk about here in just a moment, actually, about understanding your code base through our product. The other thing I want to note before I dive in, for the purposes of today, the stack I'm going to be using Python. I'm going to be using VS Code, although we do support all of the JetBrains IDEs as well. Additionally, I'm going to be using GitHub for the purposes of today, but we do support GitLab, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, and whatnot. So we should have you completely covered on the Git side for sure. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to actually change screens here for a moment and switch over to my ID, and let's talk about Qodo Gen. So right now, what I'm looking at is, again, I'm using Python as kind of a starting point here for being able to display the software. Actually, what I'm looking at here more particularly, this is a API client, basically an API wrapper for Python that I've been playing around with. And the idea is that we're going to be using this as an example of some of the things that we can do with Qodo. Now, one of the first things, as I mentioned earlier, from a process standpoint, is that before I can get started, I need to understand the code that I'm working with. In fact, sometimes I'm in demos with customers and they ask explicitly, can you help us to be able to understand the code I'm working with? And the reality is, a lot of times before I can get started, the code I'm working with, sometimes it's because I'm new to the company or new to the team, or frankly, the code that I'm working with was written by someone 3 years ago who may or may not be with the company anymore. And so being able to quickly understand how that code is working can be very important to kind of get up to speed quickly. And that's a kind of a starting point. So one of the things you're going to observe here is I have the ability to establish what I want in focus and or context throughout the product. This is kind of like a baseline fundamental aspect. And actually one of the strengths of our product is this idea of I can come in here, I can select the current file. And in fact, I can come in here and I can even select even subsets of the file, a specific class, method, function, or otherwise. In this case, I'll go ahead and just select the get tags method. And if you didn't catch on, the get tags method is actually an API method for Stack Overflow. And so the idea here is that I can just come in and do a slash command. In this case, I'm going to do explain because we're in the research phase. But you'll also notice that there's the ability to generate tests, ask free text questions, generate doc strings, generate a test suite, improve code, get suggestions. We're going to cover a lot of these, but just kind of giving you a highlight, a little bit of an overview of kind of where we're going with some of this. So right now, let's go ahead and do explain. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And this is going to go ahead and generate for me an explanation of the code that I'm working with. Now, it's usually pretty systematic. It starts off with kind of the high level of like what this function or method or function does. It gives you an example, then it goes into an example of the usage of this, like how I might use this. It then goes and gives you a detailed list of the inputs, then the flow of that code, and then ultimately the output. So kind of a very, again, kind of organized way of presenting the explanation of what it is that I'm looking at. Now, additionally, however, if I look down here and I look at references, you can see that it's actually pulling, telling you exactly how it's coming to that answer. What is it using as sources of information? Now, this could be one or more files that are in the repo that I'm working on, right? And so I have actually the files, I have the lines of code that were used in helping to decide that. Additionally, you can see down here in our enterprise product, we also have the ability to pull code from other repositories. And in fact, if I look down here in extra content, right now I actually have my company's code base selected as additional context. I can even remove that if I wanted to. And so the value of this is that now you're getting like you can get a clear picture of how that answer is being arrived at. But the other part about research here is that when I'm looking at a certain file, that file does not work in isolation, right? That file is oftentimes a part of, interacting with many other libraries, files, classes, and so forth. And having that context makes it so the answers I'm getting here aren't isolated. So as an example, I can come in here, I can add in a file or folder, and I could even add in the full project that I have locally, the full project folder that I have here on my laptop, and I can index that. In fact, you'll see down here for a brief moment, it just, if you blinked, you missed it. It actually just indexed the entire repository or file folder that I have there of all the different things. So now I can have that as extra content when I'm asking to explain code, but when I'm doing any other function here in the product, it can use that as context. Now, the other thing, however, that I want to note as the last part of research is when we are using like what we call multi-repo RAG, where we're indexing entire repositories. One of the other things that we can do here, I'm actually going to remove a lot of this focus, and I'm just going to focus on my company's code base. An example of this, kind of like what David was talking about earlier, where we're getting questions. Sometimes these questions come from other internal employees. From me, sometimes I'm getting questions from customers. Like I had a customer recently that was like, hey, when you index our repos, does it include Excel files? I don't know. That's a great question. In fact, I found out that we didn't, and I could come in here and say, how would I add support for XLS files in our Ragger? And so now it's using our company's code base to help me learn things. Now I could be asking lots of other things. I could be asking like how have we implemented authentication in other applications, or what are our best practices around certain things? This becomes almost my internal private chat GPT for my engineering team that not just knows code, but actually understands our code. And so as an example of this is actually helping me to understand the different files that are, this is actually real information, by the way. These are actually, this is proprietary code right here. Nothing that's going to allow any of you guys to hack us by any means. But the idea is this helps to show me exactly what I would do as code snippets and add to certain files and functions and so forth to be able to make that happen for the customer. And even though I'm not an engineer on this, I would feel empowered to go and submit a PR, to actually go and build out this stuff, test it, and be able to submit a PR that my engineering team could then review. And so that bleeds a little bit now over into the topic of building, because we're now talking about like how I might actually add functionality or edit functionality to achieve certain objectives. And it's actually giving me the code that I could copy to my clipboard or insert or otherwise. But I want to pause there. How are we doing on questions, David?
I've been answering them, and I just one just came up, and I'm not sure yet with the trust center. So there's a broken link. So thank
Oh,
you. We'll go ahead and submit that.
good call. If you go to, just for the record, if you go to trust.qodo.ai, that is where you can find our trust center. That is currently where it's located at. So you can go there and get additional details on security and stuff. Just for the record, security of our product isn't something that's necessarily in scope for today. That's something that we work with our customers on to help meet their security needs. And we've done a lot on that front to be able to meet security needs, whether we need to do something fancy from like a single tenant configuration perspective, or even allowing you to deploy this self-hosted on your own cloud, or even being able to do this even in an air-gapped scenario. We have a wide variety of options to meet the security needs of our customers. So definitely happy to help you guys with that offline. So next, we're talking about building. We talked about how actually you can just come in here and free text and ask questions, ask it, say like, even with the code I'm working on, I can come in here and I can go ahead and just clear out the additional context and say like, build me a new method that gets collections by title. Because I think if I go down here and here, I have a get collection by ID. I want to add in a new method that can get it by a different attribute. And now it's going to go ahead and give me the code to be able to do that. However, as you might be familiar with, if you've used other AI dev tools, you might be aware of kind of this idea of the fancy autocomplete and code completion that exists in a lot of tools today, which goes beyond the standard IntelliSense that we've used to use in decades past, where, it just kind of says, oh, it looks like you might be trying to type this function name or this variable name. Instead, now what we can do is I can come in here and I can actually prompt the product to be able to give us certain responses. So now I could do this simply by using informative naming conventions. So if I say like get collection, in fact, it's already starting to complete this for me, but if I was to even type get collection by title, it would start to say like, hey, maybe this is what you're looking for. And I say, okay, I'm going to tab, and that completes that line. I go on to the next line. And now it's going ahead, and you're going to see here that it's going to continue to give me suggestions on what I should be building for code here. In fact, it's starting to off by building a doc string for me, because it sees that the way that I typically build methods, I oftentimes have informative doc strings. And you'll see that now it's completed the entire function for me based off of that detail, right? Kind of understanding what I want, where I'm going with this. You have other ways to kind of prompt this as well. Some people might not be aware of this, but if you come in here and you just do like a hashtag, like build a new method to get collections by title, again, now it's going to be aware of what I'm trying to do, and I can prompt it that way. I can delete the comment later if I wanted to, and that's another way that I can do it. In fact, I could give probably more complete details about what I'm trying to do through a variety of comments before it actually starts laying down code. So anyway, that's the building side of things.
Hey, can we
Yeah,
can I interrupt? I think this is a good one. The comment from Peter. You can take it on, or I can take it on.
Go for it.
It's just, if I'm reading this right, you're asking about sharing and how Qodo works with sharing your repos. And we call them kind of golden repos. I don't know if that's a solid name yet, but that's what I'm going to call it. And really what happens is it's your repos. So we don't go out to other people repos, it's yours. And you have to be a single tenant enterprise or on-prems and other security ones that we can do that too. And what happens is we mark those and know those are the ones we're going to index. And we keep track of those. So it's on a nightly basis that we're going to sit there and frequency and see what has changed and re-index that. And that's how we use our magic sauce of RAG and other couple tools to come up with some enhancements that go to the large language model when you ask your question.
Yeah, in a worst case scenario, what happens from a middleware perspective, I think that's the correct term. Like we would host the indexer, and we would, as a service and a SaaS-based solution, and then you would host the database. We would never
Yep.
host the database for you. You would have it. That's where the data would be stored. We would use that accordingly for the usage of the product. In a situation where we move away from SaaS to where you're moving it self-hosted, where you want to have this in a Kubernetes cluster on your end, then you would also host the indexer, I believe, in that sort of situation. I could be mistaken, but
No,
the
you do.
idea, yeah,
Yep.
that makes sense. It would make
It's a
sense, right?
database. It's the same thing. And that's the key to this is what we work with you guys when you're doing single tenant because it has to be in your infrastructure and how do we connect and whitelisting and trusted service to service and stuff. But you own that data. So if you cut it off from us, yeah, you just don't get those searches anymore.
And the DB is a PostgreSQL database. It's just a Postgres vector database, I believe, is what we're doing there.
Yes.
That was a follow-up question that we just received. All
Yep.
right. So we talked about using our product to research, right? Kind of understand a bit more about what's going on in your code base, understanding how other things might have been implemented previously, understand the code that you're working with that maybe you didn't originally build and that's been edited by a billion other hands. Also about like building code either right in line with kind of your typical code editor, but then also being able to build code through here where you can inquire and ask it to build certain things and get kind of the fully completed code. So there's a variety of different ways you can kind of do that. Now, where we start to really excel, though, as well, and I think this is a favorite part for a lot of people that I talk to, is really kind of the polishing of code. Some people, I'll be honest with you, some senior engineers I'm working with, they might even want to come in here and just like disable code completion. They might just say like, hey, I know what I want to build. I don't want to be interrupted with these autocomplete suggestions or ideas. Other people do like it. And in some cases, what they're looking for is they're looking for something that's going to review their code for them, to help them understand things that they could be doing to improve it. And more importantly, when we're talking about polishing code, is also the testing of that code. So as a personal highlight here, let's go ahead and take this class and let's do what's called the test suite. Now, this is actually a reason that some customers actually come to us is explicitly because they've heard about or seen this function right here, where if I go ahead and like add the focus for a moment, I think it lost focus. Let's go ahead and try this.
As you're doing that, I can't pronounce the name. It's Ewere. And
Um,
Yosh, and Yos, you have your hand raised. If you want to, you can go ahead in our Q&A and ask a question in there, and then we can address it. Thank you.
Exactly. You can do that, or you could, if you wanted to, use the webinar chat and you could chat directly with the host and panelists, but Q&A is oftentimes the more popular way. So let's talk about what we're seeing here. In fact, David, maybe I'll hit you up. Like when you see this, I mean, like how do you kind of think about what's in? I mean, as someone who's used this before, like how do you
Mhm.
typically think about the test panel and how you would use it?
So what I like to think about too is that, and a lot of people address this as saying, "Hey, look, all you're doing is looking at the code, and the AI is looking at the code and generating a test for that." And we're doing a lot more than that. So if you go to the top where it says behavior coverage and you show more, you can say, "There's the test." So that top one is actually you've only done one, so it says "Go to test." But if you click on the drop down from there, that one right there, it's telling you a lot more about this, and you can click on it and go to the test, and it's hitting different behaviors. And so these are different happy path behaviors. And so we're not just going and like looking at the code and kind of generating, it's kind of understanding what that method is supposed to be doing from the code that you have. And then we'll actually generate some tests for you, some meaningful tests. And so you're saying, well, how do I know if I have full coverage, and not just a number coverage, but like true business logic and code quality? Well, you can read these. So, like successfully API connection test. So, I mean, let's generate that test, and then you can read that. And so that's where we're coming from. This is just not throwing out a couple unit tests and saying, have at it. And oh yeah, you're done. It's more like, what are you really trying to test for?
It's funny. And by the way, I like this as a great example of like a happy path test. Is kind of like, is the API connection successful, right? That's like your most fundamental one when we're thinking about this. In fact, these are kind of more or less like integration tests. We also get down into like edge cases too. And kind of like, what about if invalid parameters are provided and so forth, and then expanding that out and seeing all the sub behaviors. It's very comprehensive. And I think one of the things that stands out to me as you were talking, David, is that like I've used other solutions. I've even used like Chat GPT or whatnot. And you can ask them to give you tests for a segment of code, and it'll do it. Maybe it'll give you 3 tests. Maybe it'll give you 10. But like at no point does it say to me, that's all the tests you need, right? Where's my closure? How do I know what am I missing, right? Here's 10 tests. Is there any other important aspects that I'm lacking here? So the first part about this, and this is the part I think I like the most, is just the idea that like I'm actually having a systematic way of analyzing the code. And then after analyzing the code, giving me the list of tests. And then after I get the list of potential tests, I can go ahead and generate those. It's a multi-phase process. This isn't just like one single API call to an LLM. This is an entire user experience that's really needed here to be able to satisfy the needs of a lot of people.
I think the key to this is one of my best practices that I have of 8 of them is that one is you iterate. So just like we've done in the past, and we have not removed this, you're still in the driver's seat as a developer and you need to iterate. But now you're iterating with a partner, but you're not taking another brain person, human being, and doing this. You're able to iterate with, Qodo, and have it kind of come up with these things. I will add to this, Jonathan, one time, is that one of my things that I do, and I talk about in using an API and look at the API from Open API, 3.1 specification, and it'll create a whole bunch of tests from that contract. And I look at an API where I've implemented it and I'll return like 404. But the test put a 404. So actually the unit tests are failing, or the integration tests are failing that we create from that. And so you can find things like, oh, wait a minute, you didn't implement the 404. How can that be? And instead of returning a 200, so that's a really, these are the nice things, but it's an iterative process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the other things that's crossing my mind here too is that sometimes, I mean, we've seen it, sometimes maybe a test doesn't meet your standards, right? We've all been there. We've used AI to try to generate code for us, whether it's Chat GPT or one of those other tools that shall remain unnamed. But like if I come in here, one of some things I might note is, for example, what if like I didn't like something, right? I can actually do this right in line, right? I can come in here and say like and say like change the variables, change things in here that I didn't like before copying that to my clipboard or saving it. Additionally, if I wanted it to do something different, like add comments for each stage of the test, I could go ahead and then hit enter, and that's going to go ahead and regenerate the test according to what it is that I'm looking for. And then more importantly, what I just did there, when I asked it to add like comments, like if there's something about how I want tests generated that's going to be a consistent theme across all of my tests, rather than me having to like edit every one of those, what we do that works out really nicely is we have a configuration section. I can come in here and provide the product really a kind of a couple of different strategies to be successful for you. One is providing an example test. That's actually what I did here. By default, usually when we go and generate tests, we usually kind of target like unit tests by default. In this case, Python, we're targeting like PyTest tests or unit tests using mocks, things like that. In this case, because this is an API client, an API wrapper, I wanted to actually do integration tests. And so I came in here and I could paste even several examples of what I consider to be good tests. And then it adapts. It says, oh, I see what you're trying to do now. In fact, I was working with a customer some weeks ago, maybe over a month ago now. It's been a while, I think, where they had a special API endpoint for testing integration tests. And that's something that, frankly, our product out of the box wouldn't have been aware of. And so they went and they pasted examples of the test that they're trying to build. And and the product started adapting and saying, oh, you need to actually have this in your tests. And we started including it. Additionally, you have this box here. By the way, this is like a free form box. If you think about like prompting an LLM, you could literally put in as much information here as you want for how you want tests generated, and it can do that. As an example of this, I had a customer who this is just an example from another customer where they wanted to build UI tests with Selenium. Maybe they were using Maestro, maybe they were using Playwright. But the idea here is that you can kind of give us additional instructions, and then all of this information here can be saved as a configuration file. Now, I guess, David, in your experience, like what's some of the value points, I guess, for like using a configuration file with our product?
Yeah, so speaking about this at an enterprise level, or if you have a group of people, if you look here, there, the important little box, we have a convention, the codium.toml. And yes, the name hasn't changed yet, but that will change. But should be the one that you check in. And then the Codium local is the one that you would put on your ignore list. So now you can share with your fellow developers a default setting for this project to generate the tests. But say you have like 15 for the creating the number of desired tests, and you're like, that's too slow for me, it's taking too much time. You can actually put in your local one and say, I only want 2. So it'll allow you as a developer to, fine tune that locally on your own desktop versus everyone going across the board and getting that. So, or you might want to put some extra instructions in and stuff. So that's how I would recommend, and that's how we recommend you use that TOML file.
The other thing I thought was interesting, I learned recently, by the way, and maybe I don't know if this is new to you, David, or if anybody else on the webinar today, but like I learned you can actually add multiple Codium AI TOML files to a repo. Like
Yeah.
you could have different segments of a project, and what it's gonna do is it's actually, when you're working on a file, it's gonna look for the TOML file that's most closest in proximity from a directory structure standpoint and use that. And so, like, anyway, I just found that fascinating. Not to mention that I was working with a company that is a satellite company. And you would imagine that doing that code quality and consistency are important, and it is. And they really love the idea of being able to add this file to a repo so that all of their engineers are building tests in a very similar way. So in any case, that's our test suite. Again, we spent a little bit of time there, maybe a lot of bit of time, but that's also a highlight for many of our customers. How are we doing on questions and whatnot? Anyone that we should take live, David?
There was one, how much time can we realistically expect for tests to be created? And if I'm reading that correctly, I think it's more of, okay, we're looking at the file or looking at that class, and we're actually going to be generating those tests. And it depends on the configuration. So what I recommend, depending on your network too, because if you remember, it's calling out to our server and getting these tests generated. So if you want it faster, you go to configuration and put 1 down or put 2, and then you can go to the behavior coverage and read those other ones proposed and click on generate. But the time that it takes is minuscule. I mean, it just depends also on your network. I'm not going to say that it's, nanoseconds, but you're not dealing with seconds. You're dealing with maybe a second for each one.
Well, I mean, just using this as an example here, right? This is the bottom one, API connection test with connection error. I mean, I don't know if anybody's got a stopwatch here, but if I go ahead and just click on any test and then scroll down here, it's being generated live. I mean, that's how long it took for the test to be generated. So just kind
And
of
there was
sharing
another question too, while you're there, Jonathan, if you go down, and I do know that this is kind of a newer feature, but it says run the tests. I know that
Oh.
this isn't something, and maybe we can be kind of, I'm being evil here because I'll be honest that in the Java world they don't have this added in. I'm not sure that this will do it for Python, but I would expect
Mm.
probably, and how that connects. But I like to actually generate and put the tests in the proper test files and run those tests there. I know we have that convenience to run it from this runner, but you have to have that supplied in that environment for running those tests. So we don't like configure your testing environment. You pick the framework and your project needs to have that. So I actually highly recommend, yeah, they have the run all tests. I would say that to go ahead and put those in a file or in your environment and test those, because you're, again, I can't push this enough. You're still in the driver's seat. You're still responsible. So you have to look at the test and say, yes, this is covering it. Oh, wait a minute, you messed up here a little bit. Okay, add to it, remove from it, and keep it going.
Yeah, what I did, by the way, is I kind of removed some of my configuration here so we generate mocks so I could actually show this and working. So like if I was to go in, for example, I think this might actually work. But if I go ahead and click run and autofix on any of these tests or even all of them, what it's going to do is actually run the tests and see if it passes or fails. If it fails, what it's going to do here is it's actually going to check and actually validate. Is it because the code is bad? Or is it because the test is bad? And then it will report that back to the user. In this case, it passed, so it was kind of boring. But like if there was if I go ahead and change this so it's like it's broken code, break some of the variables and whatnot and methods. And if I go ahead and run an autofix again, let me see here. Oh, it's probably not accepting that. Let me go ahead and save that and then run an autofix again. There we go. See, so it says it failed, analyzing the failure, fixing the test, and there we go. You see it actually went in and fixed the thing so that it's actually working now. So anyway, just kind of show you that this is actually a powerful feature. It's not for all languages. It's about for the half dozen or so most popular languages like JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, I think is included, Python, whatnot. But like, so just some of those languages that we have built this functionality for, which covers a lot of you. In some cases, that function might not yet be available.
And it also depends on IDE too. So like
Correct.
an IntelliJ, it's not there for like the
That is
Java
correct.
engine.
Good call. Good call. So, any other questions we need to tackle before I continue?
No, I'm actually answering a couple. One was dealing with more like cover agent, and I'm gonna put that in the window.
Oh my goodness, people are talking about Cover Agent. That's awesome. By the way, if you guys Google Cover Agent, like our GitHub repo, it's open source. It's not yet a part of our licensed code integrity platform, so you can get full advantage of it and test it and whatnot and have fun with it. You need to bring your own LLM to the party, but the idea is that that is something we're working on and will eventually become the part of this platform as well. So let's go ahead then and talk about one last thing, and I'm going to dive into merge, which is the improve command. So this is almost like a little bit of like static code analysis, if you will, within the IDE, with maybe some additional perks or enhancements to that. So if I go ahead and do the improve command, this is going to analyze my code to understand things that maybe I can do better here. Now, this could be performance related. It could be logging related. It could be because it detects maybe some duplication. Oh, actually right here is a refactoring opportunity. And so what it's going to do is actually analyze my code to help me understand how to be able to make that better. This can actually be helpful to a lot of people before they submit a PR. They can actually select the code that they just worked on, maybe the specific method or whatnot, and then be able to analyze it to see if there's something that they should be aware of. Now, once you see an idea, concept, and it looks like interesting to you, you can get additional details to understand like why it's recommending that. You can preview the code, which will go ahead and open up the diff so you can go ahead and review how it would change things. And then additionally, if you like multiple ideas, you can select multiple checkboxes and click prepare code changes, and that will create one diff to rule them all, which will then go ahead and show you the basically the final diff, which you can then edit before being able to apply the changes. So that's how all of that works. Now, let's go ahead and move into Qodo merge, which I think for the demo today is at the Qodo channel. You might want to validate that one, David. I don't know if that's the correct Qodo channel, but YouTube channel. In any case, the idea here is if we go into, let me go ahead and change my screen here. By the way, David, not all heroes wear capes. You're doing a fantastic job in helping all those questions coming through.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand in the Qodo channel. Yeah. Oh, I think they're asking, will it be there? Yes. Okay. I'll just put
Yeah,
yes.
assuming that
Yes.
is the correct URL for the
Yes.
Qodo channel.
Yep, it is.
Um,
I
All right,
clicked on it.
so let me go ahead then and show you guys Codo merge for a second. Now, right now, you're going to notice that actually it's called PR agent still, but because I haven't updated the demo, it's been a day. Give me a break, people. But let me go ahead and show you a good example of a PR that was reviewed by us. Let me go ahead and see an example here. If I go and take a look at pull requests. Oh, this is a good one, actually. So one of the things
And
you're
a
going to
shout
notice.
out right there to Tal too. He's one of our main developers on PR Agent. What an
Mhm.
awesome job he does. I'm working on it on both sides, on the open source and the product.
So this is actually live PRs. These are actually on repos that we have. You can see this is actually Codium AI. This is actually Cover Agent. We were talking about Cover Agent a moment ago. And so one of the things you're going to observe first off is, and we'll talk more in depth about this in a moment, is we label PRs automatically when they come through and give them a score from 1 to 5 for review effort. This is really kind of critical. Like I'm looking at a list of PRs. Is this a PR that I could get done before my lunch break, or a PR that I should schedule some time on to be able to tackle? Or what, right? And so we've got a range here. We've got a 2 down here. We've got a 4 up here. Let's do this 4 and give you a sense of what happens. So what we do is we come over the top when a PR is generated, we add an additional comments to be able to help out the PR reviewer as well as the submitter. And so the first part about this is the description. In fact, one of the things that some of our customers like a lot about us is how we give accurate descriptions of the PR. In fact, you might even notice here that the person who submitted the PR didn't even submit a description. They're completely leaning on the description provided by the PR rate, or what's called a Codo merge now. And what happens is we give a kind of a complete description, which frankly a lot of times captures things that people overlooked or forgot that they made as changes during the code changes. But then additionally, we then give a file by file walkthrough of the changes. And so I can go ahead and expand out cover agent.py and see what was changed in there or whatnot. And it kind of helps me to, again, walk through this. And then once I understand what it is that's being changed in this file, I can then click on this and takes me directly to the diff so I can see what were the actual changes. So it makes it really kind of easy from a walkthrough standpoint, rather than purely going to the typical, which is we go to the files changed and look at the changes, and then kind of like read tea leaves a little bit. This helps to make that walkthrough a lot easier and a lot less time consuming to kind of get up to speed on what's going on. Now, the next part about this gets exciting. A couple of things. First, CI failures. If there's CI failures of any sort, we analyze the logs and we provide summaries and other details. Like I can expand this out to get relevant log errors. But the key is that I get this nice summary rather than me having to go through and review that and understand more of what happened. And so anyway, this is something that a lot of people get excited about. I was actually on a call with a customer recently, and they were like, actually, my engineers were asking me to actually, if we could do something like this sort of a functionality. And it was really convenient that we have something like that right out of the box.
Yeah, you know
Uh,
what this allows you to do for someone who in all my parts of my companies that I've worked at, I've always put the failure, you set the percentage and you put a failure rate there, but you only get, hey, the build failed. So this at least gives you, hey, the build failed. And now, oh, well, it's tests. So you don't even have to go back and, it wasn't compilation failure. It was actually a test. So it's really fast.
that's a great point. Actually, it's kind of comical, actually. It failed because it was like 0.2% below the threshold. But
That's
in
not
any case,
65 though.
exactly, right? But at least we got a quick answer to that, right? I think that's really important. Now we go down below that. Now we get into the PR reviewer guide. Now, by the way, these comments that you're seeing here can be turned on or off. You can choose which things you like and which things you don't. You can kind of customize how some of these things are I guess, implemented. I'll show you a configuration file in a second, but all of this is very highly configurable. In this case, we get down to the estimated effort of review. We understand if there were any relevant tests submitted. I guess that takes us back to the test coverage piece. There was no relevant tests submitted as part of this, which could be a little bit of a red flag to a reviewer, maybe. No security concerns, thankfully. However, we're not a replacement for like a static code analysis tool or like a sneak for example, but we will point out if there's like a potential SQL injection risk. We'll also point out other potential issues like null pointer exceptions and so forth, because it's the place to kind of point those things out. Additionally, you'll notice that some of the other types of issues we can post here are not just potential bugs, but performance concerns, code duplication concerns, and then lastly, specific code suggestions. And you'll see that we score these, by the way, and they go up to a score of 10. And if I go ahead and expand this out, it actually tells us specifically what sort of code it would change to help remediate such an issue. And probably one of my favorite parts, you can check the box here to apply that suggestion. You can even see down here that checkbox means that that suggestion's already been applied. Now, by the way, even if you don't use us to apply the suggestion, maybe you like the suggestion, but you decide to apply the fix slightly differently, and you go ahead and submit the new commit. If you fix the issue, it's going to actually update this with a checkbox to indicate that this was taken care of. And so it's really kind of thoughtful in that regard.
And can I
So
add to
that's,
this? So
oh,
your
please do.
Qodo, so again, with this too, a lot of people are saying, oh, I don't, I would rather have this ahead of time. These kind of commands you can actually get in your Qodo gen too. So while you're writing the code, you don't have to say, oh, I got to wait until everyone can see this and then I put a security concern there. You can actually get this kind of review by that and get that input first so that you can address it before even trying to submit the PR or creating that. And in this iterative thing as a platform for quality, say you do miss something or you didn't pick a best practice and someone says, hey, we really want you to do that best practice. Say your lead says, look, that one best practice, that's an 8, please apply that. Well, then you can go back on your IDE and do it. You don't have to try to do it in the editor because you're probably going to update a unit test, if you're changing code or doing something like that. So you can make sure everything's still working. You're not going to break the build. Then you can apply it. And that's what I like about the green box is, like you were saying, there, Jonathan, that it actually will assume and look at it. And it doesn't have to be exactly right. It says, oh, you met the criteria and you've solved it. Checkbox.
I love it. And I've had that come up, by the way. When I showed this to some people, they were like, wait a second, is this going to like air all my dirty laundry now whenever I post a PR? And the short answer, like we talked about when we first talked about Qodo Gen, about making it easy to generate unit tests, avoiding some of those bugs, potential bugs, using the improve command to get code suggestions about things that, again, you can catch those things before they get submitted a PR, do a little bit of that. I'm going to use like a buzzword here, shift left, and you got that in your power to be able to do now. So again, the whole idea here is we want to create a system here from end to end that is about code quality and catching code issues in those different phases along the journey. So the last part I'll talk about, and then I'll open up the floor for any remaining questions. Again, David's been doing a good job with that, but nonetheless, is I'm going to flip over to a repo here where I have an example configuration file. This just happens to be for Bitbucket, but the idea here is to give you an example is some of the commands that I showed you earlier, some of the comments you saw were the result of a describe command, a review command, and an improve command. The only one that's not here is the CI feedback command. But in any case, with each of those, you can not only indicate which of those run automatically. This can be at a global level across all your repos, and a lot of times this will be like a global configuration file. And then at a individual repo file, you could then have specific configuration there. So maybe you have one project team who's working on a certain product or project, and they don't like the improve command, right? You can actually turn that off for them, right? That it doesn't run when they do PRs if you really wanted. Additionally, per command, you have a lot of flexibility in kind of how those commands are run. If I was to use the improve command, for example, you might have saw that we gave 4 code suggestions. That's the default. But if you wanted like only 2 suggestions because you felt 4 was too chatty, or you wanted like 8 or 10 because you felt they were very valuable, you can customize that here. Likewise, you can even set the threshold. So we had scoring. And what if you only wanted recommendations that were above a score of 7? You could actually configure that here. And so there's a lot of configurability. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of the different options here, but like we help our customers to configure this to meet their needs, even down to the fussiest engineering teams who have specific requirements on how they want this to run. We also will note that for each of these, we also have an open-ended extra instructions. This is your LLM prompt right here, where you can basically add in as much text as you want on what's important to you and what you care about and what you don't care about and so forth. And that sort of extra instructions is also available in pretty much every one of the different commands or functions of Qodo merge. I almost slipped up there, guys. I almost said the wrong name again. So in any case, that is the end of the demo.
Can I hit one thing, because I hate reading documentation? I'm just joking. I love docs and I want to know how it goes. But now, let's say that you don't want to read it. How would you go about like testing out this and seeing how it works? Um,
Oh, that's a great question. I apologize. I completely neglected that. We are not done with the demo, everybody. The demo continues. And in fact, the reason I say that is we have a Chrome extension. Hopefully, most, if not all of you, have the ability to use a Chrome or Chromium-based browser, whether it's Edge or Arc or otherwise. And you'll note down here, with the Chrome extension, we add in different commands that you can run ad hoc. You don't need to run them automatically. In fact, you could have all the commands turned off to run, not run automatically, and then run them as needed. So I could come in here and run the improve command.
And the one thing I want to hit on this is, as you do that, they come in as comments. So if you're running these and you're not the committer, you're going to be spamming that committer with these, as opposed to if you had them in the normal file. Just
That
FYI.
is true.
But if you're testing out this and saying, hey, I want to alter the TOML file, or maybe test this out to make sure it's working, this is a good way of doing that.
Exactly. So it's more of an ad hoc thing where, like I showed earlier, you can actually set the number of code suggestions, score threshold, and I could actually run this right now with those ad hoc variables or parameters and see how the output would look. And then as David was talking about, I can even export this as a config. So there we go. Now I actually have the config that I would add to a configuration file in the repo or otherwise, and it's ready to rock and roll. And so really some fascinating things I can do here. The last thing I might note that we just added for the Chrome extension as well, which is I think only available for GitHub right now. GitLab might be added in the near future, is if you're in the files change section, you're going to notice there's a chat box down here. I can come in here and chat about the PR. I can select which files. And in fact, it's probably cut off on your end, but it shows all the different files in the drop-down box here. I can actually focus in on a certain file, for example, and I can ask questions. What are some potential risks from these changes? Or I could ask, like, outline what I should know about these changes, or I could do this for all
Or
of the
what's
changes.
WAN-DB? So here's the thing that I like is, like,
Oh,
you're coming
yeah.
in and you have to review this code, and you don't want to let everyone else know that you don't know WAN-DB and you want to look like a rock star. So why not type in what's WAN-DB? No one else will know that you asked what it is to get understanding before you approve the code. Sorry, I get really passionate about this one because this
It's
has
an
helped
incredibly
so
important
much.
point. It's basically your PR review assistant to kind of help you understand a lot of those different things. I think that's a great use case. The other advantage of this, by the way, is it does not show up as a comment or anywhere on the PR. This is only in your browser, on your computer. It is private to you. No one else is seeing it. And that's also the other valuable part. One, it's not disruptive to other people through commenting. And then the other part of that is, frankly, you don't need to worry about other people seeing what you're asking about or looking silly or otherwise. This is actually something that you can use as your own personal tool. So that is now everything officially, everybody. Hopefully that was helpful. Are there
Thanks
any
for going
lingering
over that,
questions?
Jonathan.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for bringing it up. I would have overlooked it.
It's one of the things that make me look like a rock star now on a code review. I don't see any more open. If anyone has any.
I think that's a wrap then, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful rest of your week. Hopefully this is helpful. Again, if you want to try this out, go to Qodo AI, get started. We come with a free evaluation for a couple of weeks. Also, you've got folks like myself and David who are here at the Qodo side to be able to help out people like yourself who are trying to go through the evaluation process and configure it to meet your needs. So either way, reach out to us. Happy to be able to help further.
Yeah, and happy coding with Qodo.
Yeah. Take care, everybody.